Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I'm going to talk about the benefits of using samE as an antidepressant and as an alternative to traditional SSRIs. Um, Before jumping in, I'm going to explain why doctors utilize samE instead as an alternative source, and just the key benefits. But also, I'm also going to mention downsides and why you should not take samE. Depending on the individual, it depends on the individual level. It depends on the conditions. It depends on many factors, and just so as with any medication, any source, it's not necessary. There's always going to be positives and negatives to the equation, and there's always going to be individuals who respond differently because we all have different biochemistries. We all all the different combinations are going to be, there's so many different variations. So you got to consider that as well, and also at the dosage. The dosage is going to be different for everyone. But the reason why doctors tend to use samE is because it works much quicker than traditional SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. The SSRIs, can be very complicated. It's very hard to adjust and figure out which dosage to utilize because and doctors don't fully understand. Of course, we're never going to fully understand any of these. The biofeedback, or just how the body responds to, at the subatomic level, or just all the, but we're gaining more knowledge, and essentially this, with SSRIs, with anything, it's, you test it, you trial, you learn, and then you try to optimize it, and then you come up with another medication and you try to minimize the negatives and try to amplify the positives. But with SSRIs, of course, it's working on the serotonin it works on the enzyme that actually breaks down serotonin. So essentially, it blocks that action, but it doesn't happen immediately. And of course, the serotonin it builds up in the system. It allows the serotonin to build up between the synapse, and essentially, once the process has or it's accumulated over a certain time, the serotonin is definitely, it floods in, and essentially it all works differently, and the mechanism is so complex. There's many different reasons why SSRIs could, they could potentially be beneficial to certain individuals, and of course they could be harmful, depending, of course, on the dose and how you regulate it. How consistent how the consistency of each dosage, and as well as with anything, there's especially with SSRIs, it's man-made. So the problem with man-made products is the body has to adapt to any source that has been altered, or basically we can try to artificially create something that may mimic the effects of a neurotransmitter, may alter the receptor at the receptor level, but by doing so, it's possible to cause shifts in energy in different directions, and those shifts tend to come up maybe later, and it could be a negative, essentially, because you could have positive, you're directing energy in this direction, but essentially you could be repressing energy in other areas. So there's many different variations, and of course, same with samE. But the samE, the reason doctors tend to use it is it has less negatives in terms of, like, I know with SSRIs it can cause sexual problems, reproductive problems, and of course there's some level of toxicity. You got to consider if man-made source, and the body hasn't totally acclimated to the source, or where it's coming from. Because anytime you manipulate, if you manipulate, anything, information, or it's just, a lot of times it's very localized. And what I mean by this is, like, for instance, when we isolate a component from any food product, and when you isolate the components, sure, it could be, it can only be, you can direct it towards one area, but the thing is food consists of so many enzymes, so many different byproducts that we don't even know. We're learning every day. There's more and more biochemical, or there's more and more elements within, all the, like, nutrients in the core. So, think of like multivitamins, the reason why they tend to be detrimental is because we do not know the perfect ratios for any given situation. Nature provides the ratios that we need to to survive, and we've adapted over time to the consumption of natural products. And as you change and you alter and you do it immediately, the adaptation process is not immediate. So therefore, what this does is it, with all these allergies, you got to consider that, it's probably due to the change in the processing. And of course, genetics dictate whether or not the time or the gap in time until these problems occur. So, so I tend to be more, I try to take, it's good to take something that's not so divergent from the natural elements. And samE is a naturally produced element. It's produced within the body. Actually, it's produced within the liver. And the liver, just like the liver producing cholesterol, samE is very important because it regulates the methylation cycle within the body. The methylation cycle is essentially regulates many biochemical processes, including neurotransmitter regulation. It keeps neurotransmitters in balance, and it also regulates liver health. So samE has been used for people with liver cirrhosis. Usually higher doses are utilized because it prevents stagnancy of the gallbladder and the liver, and it's very useful for improving bile flow. And bile flow it helps you digest fat, and if you have poor liver function, you can't digest fats well, and you basically, therefore, the fats, because fats are large molecules and they take a lot of energy to digest, it causes more toxicity, because if you can't break it down, it's a larger molecule, it causes more inflammation, potentiates, it causes corrosion within the body and the blood vessels, that causes inflammation, so then the cells have to grow to repair it, but that over time, as the cells continue to do so, it goes inward, so your blood vessels go inward, constricting the surface area or the radius of the blood vessel, and therefore causing, circulation problems, and therefore the uptake of oxygen is less. And then when the uptake of oxygen is less, you got less ability to distribute energy to the organ system, and then essentially it's easier to create an imbalance within the body. So the body works, everything connects, everything is linked in a chain. So the more you know, the more of course we can make more of these connections, but there's also so much that we don't know. And with samE, anything, it's going to have benefits. Of course, it's going to have downsides. But the key benefits is the regulation of the methylation cycle, which is profoundly, it's very, very important to keep well-being balanced, or keep a good level of well-being, because well-being is dictated on regulation of the neurotransmitters in the brain, and how the communication between the synapses. And of course, you need the liver and the brain balance. If the liver is not functioning well, which samE helps protect the liver because it helps boost glutathione levels, which is a key antioxidant to keep the liver functioning in optimal condition. The brain has less toxicity. And anytime you have toxicity, if you consume alcohol, if you consume anything that degrades the liver, it causes, over time, the communication, the gaps between the neurotransmitters to degrade. And then, that it doesn't even matter at that point. Whatever level of neurotransmitters you create, if there's not good communication or good connection, they're not going to work very well. So, of course, the receptor density is very important. The receptor sensitivity is very important, and samE helps preserve this. And essentially, when you preserve it, you still have to consume, obviously, a good diet, because you need tauroftan to produce dopamine or serotonin. You also need methionine. You also, I believe the precursor to L-dopa, which is tyrosine. You need L-tyrosine to produce the precursor to dopamine. So, of course, a good diet, you need good, rich protein sources that consist of L-tyrosine and methionine, and as well as tyroftan. Tyroftan, you usually get these from animal products, but not necessarily. You can find any, whether you're vegetarian, whether you're vegan, you can always find sources that are high of the, that contain these amino acids. That's why plant products have amino acids, but they may not contain the full array like animal products. But you can, if you have a varied diet, you can target all these areas, essentially. So the key is, good varied diet. You need to. I tend to protein. I've noticed that when I consume samE, when I consume a protein, it tends to work more favorably. But another thing you need to consider when you consume samE, if in order for it to work, you need B vitamins, because the regulation of the methylation cycle, which it needs B vitamins as a catalyst. Basically, there's this whole cycle. It needs certain cofactors, and B vitamins, and I believe choline, methionine, other cofactors exist within the cycle. And if you don't consume B vitamins, what ends up happening is a byproduct of the methylation cycle, and with samE, once it does its job or performs its action, there's a byproduct, and the byproduct happens to be homocysteine. And homocysteine is naturally regulated through B vitamins. So if you're not getting enough B vitamins, it builds up, and the homocysteine actually acts as a neuroexcitation agent. And what that causes, it can cause neurotoxicity. And if you produce too much, it can cause anxiety, panic attacks, mania. So the key thing to consider, if you have a condition like bipolar disorder or mania, or you're going in that direction, you should never not take samE, because it could potentiate the mania. It could force you into mania. And anytime you have bipolar, you need to be under your doctor's supervision anyways. You're always, especially the severity, I know bipolar is on the spectrum. It's always, you need to, take medication to try to construct balance. And samE will kind of create the disequilibrium. Because with bipolar, you need to try to formulate a way to balance or retain or try to move toward that direction, because with bipolar, the cause of it is some disequilibrium. You're going away from balance, so therefore to mitigate it, you have to go in the direction of balance. And that's very difficult initially, of course, when things are going kind of chaotic with mania. But that's one condition. Of course, you shouldn't take samE. If you have anxiety, if you have other conditions like heart conditions, you probably shouldn't take samE. And anytime you take samE, if you want to know whether it works or not, or what's, because it depends on the system, because another side effect is digestive issues, and the reason for that is because samE is very unstable. So anytime you attain samE, you want to make sure it's enteric coated. Enteric coating is basically a coat that they apply to stabilize samE, and you also want to make sure that it's blister packed, because if it's not, it's it's unstable, so it needs to have a stable packaging, right? So blister pack, I usually go with Jarl or Doctor's Best. I've used those two brands. Jarl is actually pretty potent. It's a little bit more expensive. If you want to, if you're on a budget, I'd go with Doctor's Best. It's still very potent, or I think it's a good source. And it hasn't really caused so much digestive issues or stomach problems for me. Of course, when I take it, I take it with water, B vitamins, and I ensure that I'm not eating a meal with it, because I don't want to cause more disruption. I want it to absorb into my system. So usually, I won't eat within that time frame that I'm taking it. But another thing to consider also, samE, the benefits have to do with detoxification. So like I mentioned with the liver, it actually helps regulate the detoxification pathways. So that's another benefit, which can indirectly help mood and depression. And they've actually found that low levels of samE in conditions like Alzheimer's and deep depression. So of course, there's a coexistence between Alzheimer's and depression. If you've ever been depressed, you notice your memory, you start getting brain fog, you become apathetic, you lose motivation. And the key benefits I've noticed with the samE is it's definitely increased motivation. It almost acts like a Adderall to a degree. It allows me to go into this focused state, or set have goal orientated, set goals, and just it allows my brain to function better, of course, than when I had a deep brain fog. So samE is very good at preserving, keeping the brain functioning well. Of course, anytime you consume it, I would consume a lot of water, because there could be potential risk of kidney problems. The only reason for that, when you take any medication, anything, you should increase the water intake. The reason is because it all gets filtered through the kidneys, and if you consume a static amount of water, well, you're adding something that could potentially be hard to break down. So by adding water, you're diluting it and you're preventing the toxicity. So of course, anytime you take medications, ensure you drink plenty of water. It's always good to have a good diet, and because anything, it's there's going to be detrimental effects, and it's not necessarily because of the samE itself. It could be other things, like if you don't consume enough water and you take samE and then you have kidney problems later on. Well, it's probably could be a potential reason, just not enough water. And then, anytime people take, for instance, seizure medicine can be very harmful on the liver. Well, you need to consume more water because of that, to prevent the liver toxicity. So that's just one few disadvantages. And I just think, samE is very beneficial because it is naturally produced by the body. Therefore it's easier to, at least adjust in the same way because it is adjusted with the liver. And of course, if you take too much and, your liver tries to balance in certain areas, whatever it needs, it will assimilate. And of course, again, I'm going to, emphasize that you need to take B vitamins. Ensure you take enough B vitamins. Ensure you take get enough protein when you're taking samE, and a varied diet, of course. And it should work out generally because there are people who can, have become like I've, been on many forums, and if you don't take samE and if you don't take B vitamins with samE, you definitely run risk of panic or anxiety. And of course, because homocysteine, if that builds up, that's the reason. And of course, that's why you want to get a potent B vitamin or just something that I usually prefer. B vitamins that are fermented or produced from food, because anytime when you ferment something, you're pre-digesting it. When you pre-digest and you add enzymes, it makes it easier to assimilate. The key when you take multivitamins, you don't want to make it hard to process. You want to make it ease on the digestive system. The mood and the digestive system are intricately connected in so many ways. And the balance between, that's why like samE, potentially if you have a poor digestive system already, it may not assimilate well, and therefore you may find that samE is not working. So the key is everything has to be intact. You got to work on the digestive system if you want to regulate or improve mood, get rid of depression, because the oscillation of these cycles is proportional to health. We can make that claim, but also health is a function of genetics. So there is some genetic, but genetics isn't just one. It's not like just because your ancestors, may have been alcoholics or this and one, and therefore affected your genetics. You can always improve it over time. There's always evolving. Your genetics are always evolving. So you can improve it at a certain rate. And of course, so as long as you move in a direction, if you're progressing forward or you're moving, and there's always a solution, but the solution may not be evident immediately. So of course with samE, the same thing. It may not be the solution for you, but it's worked with many individuals, and I find it has worked for me, and it's definitely helped my motivation. And I'm just, thankful I found it. It's something that I didn't want to be on medication for the rest of my life going into these swings, and of course because when you want to take something that's kind of like dulling creativity, and I find that and of course it depends on the severity, but I find the medication I took before, Lamictal, when it kind of seemed to dull everything, and it just took kind of the life out of me. And at certain points, it did act as kind of a stimulating effect, but at the same time, I didn't like the side effects as well. And of course, with seizure medicine, the longer you take it, when I seizure medication, it's going to affect the brain in some form or fashion. So I tend to go in this route, and of course. Another medication I could recommend if you want to balance, your adrenal gland function, prevent anxiety, and it could be supplementary, or it could kind of work together with samE, is ashwagandha, which is Indian ginseng. It helps regulate the endocrine system. It helps balance the adrenal glands, and it adds back when you balance the whole system. Of course, that can potentiate samE or keep regulate the cycles and prevent divergence from the central zone, or whatever like we could define as like, because any cycle or mood cycle is in the swing, it goes up and down, but there exists like a middle ground which is always changing. It may go up and down depending on the cycle, but what ashwagandha does is it kind of dampens, it keeps things within good limit. So anytime, like especially if you got mood disorder, bipolar, ashwagandha could possibly help facilitate balance. If you have mania, there exists a peak in the mania. So if you take ashwagandha, it's not going to cure bipolar. But what you want to do is you want to minimize the spikes. If you can somehow minimize the balance or minimize the amplitude, because the central limit I like to define is there's a force pulling you direct to the central or the middle there's a force that's directing you down towards the neutral axis, and there's also a force pulling you back up. As you go further and further away, you're creating more imbalance, more instability. It's kind of like diabetes. When you have diabetes, your blood sugar is going off. Eventually reaches a point where you can't contain it anymore. You can't. It's not being pulled down anymore. Your blood sugar. Same with the mood. Ashwagandha. What it does is it kind of keeps it centered. It keeps it more grounded. It keeps these swings from spiking into outer space. So that's just my advice. I just think there's a lot of benefits to samE aside from just the mood. Regulating depression. There's many other benefits, and there's of course downsides with anything. So always keep that into consideration. And I'm going to stop right here, and I hope that helped, and I'll see you next time.